Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to rise in the House again to speak on Bill C-49, the Transportation Modernization Act. As you know, Mr. Speaker, this is an omnibus bill that substantially amends 13 different acts and has consequential impacts on 3 modes of transportation: rail, air, and water. Now, it should have been broken up, yet the Liberals across voted against the member of Carleton Trail, Eagle Creek, when she made recommendations in the committee to break this up and study each one in greater detail to cover some of the problems that we have in Canada. This bill is in response to Canada Transportation Act review, which was tabled in 2016 by the Liberals, but was initiated by the previous Conservative Minister, Emerson, in 2014. The review that Emerson did was looking ahead 20 to 30 years to identify priorities and potential actions in transportation that would support Canada's long-term economic well-being. We recognized that transportation and the economy was changing, and we had to make sure that the legislation was up to date. The Emerson report was submitted to the Minister almost 18 months ago and provided the government with 60 recommendations to address range and changing conditions and challenges across Canada's transportation sector. Unfortunately, the Liberals decided to launch another consultation process and are only just tabling the legislation this year. Well, I'm not going to say there aren't good parts to this bill. There are some good parts, and there are some bad parts, and I think they missed the mark in a few areas, and I'd like to address some of those. And I'm going to address the good ones too, Mr. Speaker. Now, in going through Bill C-49, the creation, I'll deal first with railroad, Mr. Speaker. The creation of the new long-haul interswitching regulation, it has a lot of good facts, and you know, that followed suit from the Fair Rail Grain Farmers Act that was brought in by our government. And I'm not going to go into too much detail. There's some good parts of it and there's some bad parts, and I know it has been debated a lot in the committee, and I think they pretty well worked on that. One area that I'd like to comment on, which I think was positive, that the Canada Transportation Agency gains the power to order a railroad to compensate any shipper that is adversely affected for a railway's failure to fulfill the service level obligations under the new definition. And it also allows the Canada Transportation Agency to try to informally settle disputes between railways and shippers and mandates 90-day rulings by the CTA. You know, and I was very glad to see this, Mr. Speaker, because in my riding of Yellowhead, the CN runs through it and is a major east-west corridor for CN. And over the last 3 or 4 years, I have been receiving many complaints from major companies such as forestry, mining, coal mining, gravel haulers, fracking sand haulers, etc., grain haulers, that the railroad company would commit to have a train at a certain location or facility at a certain time. They would have a crew on of 10 people ready to load that train, and yet no train would show up. And sometimes wouldn't show up for a day or two. Understanding they're paying these crews, they have shipment orders that might be going to the West Coast, shipment orders that may be looking forward to connecting with a ship to go to overseas ports. And yet the railway did not consider that in good faith. And I think this portion of the Act was really excellent to see, and hopefully it will resolve those type of issues. Now, another concern that I have that wasn't addressed in this omnibus bill is the length of trains that are now running in Canada and the lack, I feel, of proper crews on those trains. We are running trains that are probably 2 to 3 times larger today than they were 10, 15 years ago. It puts a lot of stress on the train crews. It puts a lot of stress on communities. And I'm going to give you an example, Mr. Speaker. But before I give the example on that, I just want to read a section here. Section 97.2 of the grade crossing regulation states, it's prohibited for a railway equipment to be left standing on a crossing surface or for switching operations to be conducted in a manner that obstructs a public grade crossing, including by the activation of a gate of a warning system for more than 5 minutes when vehicular or pedestrian traffic is waiting to cross. It goes on to say in section 98 that if there is a repeated issue with trains blocking a crossing, that it should be resolved through collaboration between the rail company, local road authorities, etc. If that doesn't work, the local authority can send a letter to the minister to request the resolution. Now, this is something that has been brought up a number of times in this House, rail crossings, and this government and the committee failed to address those concerns. Now, I'm going to give you an example. The town I live in is Edson, located in the center of Yellowhead riding, and we have 2-mile trains that come in and stop, whether it's for crew changes, whether it's for checking brakes or for whatever. I could probably stack on top of my desk the number of complaints that I get that the train is stopped for 15 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour. And when it does that, Mr. Speaker, our town is divided by the railroad track. People from outside of the other side of that track cannot get into town. We have had ambulance stranded. We've had emergency situations. And we keep bringing them up with CN, and we do not see changes. CN is monitoring the crossings, but we still continue to see blockages. Now, this is a problem. Now, CN says, if you phone them, we'll break a train. Try to break a train 2 miles long at a crossing. It's virtually impossible. If you have a person having a heart attack on the other side of that train and you're trying to get an ambulance, that person's life can be in jeopardy. And that's the situation we are facing in our community and other communities throughout our riding. Now, it says, as I said, oh, you can talk to the railroad company, then you can go to the minister and you can look for results. I did that as their member of parliament. I called the meeting of CN and Transport Canada, and you know what the Transport Canada official said? Hey, we got really long trains. Disregard the 5 minutes. It's not a big problem. You know, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, so what? We got big trains. They're not interested in looking after it. That's failed in the new regulations. It should have been addressed, Mr. Speaker. Air. Creation of air passenger rights regime, Mr. Speaker, I think it's right. We all know that over the last few years, we've seen a lot of bad things happening in U.S. airlines, and we see a lot of bad things happening in Canada. Delays. Lots of times the airlines say they haven't got a crew, they can't go to a smaller community, the flight's canceled. The one thing they did not address, which was very important to Canadians, is the cost of air travel. And I just want to give you an example. Mr. Speaker, I go back and forth to my riding almost every weekend. It costs me 4 times as much to go to my riding, which is 1,000 kilometers shorter than it is from New York to Los Angeles. And the U.S. cost is 1/4 of what I have to pay. We need to look at the costs incurred by Canadian air travelers. We're looking at parts of the new air regulations allowing CASA to be increased by certain airports to improve the flow of people going through and security measures. Now, I don't disagree with that. I spend a lot of time going through Ottawa Airport, going through Edmonton Airport coming back, and sometimes there's long lineups. But that cost should not be deferred to the air travel. I believe it should be incurred by the Government of Canada. The Government of Canada is requiring the security recommendations. Now, I just want to deal with very quickly, I don't think I have much time left, Mr. Speaker, but I just want to deal with the marine ports and the ability for them to borrow money from the new infrastructure bank. And I believe that that is totally wrong, Mr. Speaker, because the infrastructure bank is saying, oh, we'll lend you $100 million or more. But what about the little communities like Edson, the city of Fort St. John, small cities across this country that are looking for infrastructure money to assist them in their infrastructure needs? And we're going to sit and take that money and we're going to squander it to the large centers and big seaports that I don't believe is the right way to do it. Thank you.
Questions and comments? Questions et commentaires. The Honourable Member for Winnipeg North.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just want to pick up on the member's last comments in terms of this whole infrastructure program. You know, for the first time, we actually have a government that's dedicated hundreds of millions of infrastructure dollars for rural communities in every region of our country. That money is going to be spent. And yes, that is true. It's money that has actually been allocated to support our rural communities. And I'm wondering if the member opposite would make that commitment to support, at the very least, that aspect of the budget. He seems to be concerned about rural infrastructure. We finally have a government that's genuinely concerned about building not only urban, but also ensuring that smaller communities are receiving infrastructure dollars. And if he could share his thought on that particular program. I believe it's somewhere in the neighborhood of $2 billion.
The honourable member for Yellowhead.
Well, I'd like to thank the honourable member for that question, and I still think that I'm not talking just about rural communities, I'm talking about small cities and that stuff. And if I look back in my riding, what I've got in the last 2 years is probably a quarter of what I got in the 2 years that we were in government. Now, I'm not saying that there's a difference there, but it's hard for these smaller communities to go after infrastructure funding. And if we're going to use large amounts of money to go to seaports and major infrastructure in major cities, the smaller communities are going to be left out.
Questions and comments. Questions et commentaires. L'honorable député de Sherbrooke.
Merci, Monsieur le Président, et merci à mon collègue pour son intervention. J'aimerais poser une question par rapport à la charte des passagers aériens, qui est en toute fin pratique une coquille vide dans le projet de loi, parce que la charte, elle n'a pas de description. On n'en connaît à peu près rien. Elle sera déterminée plus tard par le ministre des Transports, quand il va décider que ce sera le moment de publier un règlement là-dessus. Et donc, qu'est-ce que mon collègue pense du fait que le gouvernement se pète les bretelles, comme on dit, avec sa fameuse charte des passagers aériens, alors que finalement, ce qu'on a devant nous, c'est une coquille vide. Et on n'a aucune assurance que cette charte-là va bel et bien protéger les consommateurs canadiens.
The honourable member for Yellowhead.
Speaker, through you, I'd like to thank the member for that question. And no, it's not clear. I mean, it's just like if you look at the regulation pertaining to the railroad, and I know I'm just stepping off the subject here for a minute, but the boxes inside, the little black boxes inside the engines, it's not clear exactly what they're doing. They come up with this idea that they're going to put it in for safety. And I agree, for safety it's probably better. I'm a commercial pilot. I know about the black boxes in larger aircrafts and the need for that facility. Now let's go to the public air transportation. Are they looking after the public? No. Yes, they come some regulations, but it should be affordable to travel in your own country. I lived in northern British Columbia, and it used to cost me more to go from Fort St. John to Vancouver than it would cost me to go, once I was at Vancouver, to go to Europe. And people in this country should have the opportunity to travel with a reasonable amount of funds from one part of this country to the other part of this country.